I am the Movie Maestro. Welcome to one of my film reviews. I've mentioned before that films can simply be influential just based on the name of the director attached to it, and Stanley Kubrick is no exception. Well, if you're familiar with my review of The Shining, if any of you have seen that, then you'll know that I really appreciate his style, and I do think he's got an interesting way of challenging people moralistically, and this film for sure definitely does that as well. But the twist on this one is that he plays it up more for comedy rather than to put people on the edge of their seats. Well, technically this does put people on the edge of their seats, but more at the same time doing something to make it a little bit more ironic, if you will. This is an example of ironic comedy to the best of its abilities, in my personal opinion. And with that said, let us talk about Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. The film was released in 1964, directed by Stanley Kubrick, and written by Stanley Kubrick and another similarly surreal author named Terry Southern, who would later produce and write several other cult classics, though none quite as influential as this. And the interesting thing about this story is that it centers around 3 specific locations, and all extremely different. The first setting is a U.S. naval base, where a mad general orders a nuclear attack on a Russian army base, and it turns out that he is completely insane, and is trying to be reasoned with by a man named Lionel Mandrake, played by Peter Sellers. And the second setting is the war room of the Pentagon, where the rather effeminate president, also played by Peter Sellers, is trying to find a way to recall the mission, but it turns out the ways of sending the mission forth are so efficient it's almost impossible to bring things back, as frequently brought up by the jingoistic member of the jury played by George C. Scott, who definitely is meant to bring up the general amount of laughs for his cartoonish attitude. The third setting is a B-52 bomber headed by Major King Kong, played by Slim Pickens. He and his team, which includes James Earl Jones in his very first ever film role, are on their way to drop the bomb with absolutely no knowledge of the desperate attempts to recall them. Each of these 3 settings has its own distinct atmosphere, its own distinct attitude, its own distinct way of playing out and pacing and such, and yet they all add to the experience in such a fascinating way. Indeed, this easily is one of the more interesting films to come from this particular time period. It's quite impressive how Kubrick, with his disturbing ideas, which are indeed quite present in this, is still able to make something that's actually pretty laugh-out-loud funny. Because oddly enough, this film mostly taps into the problems that arise when we strive as humans for more efficiency with everything we create, and ultimately that leads to our demise, as evidenced with stuff like the Doomsday Machine and the recall codes. And yet, there's a lot of humor in this that plays throughout, and some of it just doesn't even make any sense, and yet somehow still works. Because this film sort of creates its own world, where it exaggerates the paranoia largely present in America about the Russians' technology and warfare. Admittedly, even now, looking back on it, it's quite something. Peter Sellers and the numerous characters that he plays in one film, the most memorable probably being the Dr. Strangelove himself with his mechanical arm or something, I don't know, but it keeps flying into a Nazi salute of its own accord, definitely leaves a gigantic impression. And indeed, so many images from this film have become so iconic that they've been reused everywhere in different comedic arenas. The closing line, the image of Major King Kong astride the bomb, the fact that all of the names are suggestive in a certain way, how they relate to the sexual inadequacy and tension that lies within us, the enormous amount of phallic symbols within, the presence of numerous characters all played by one person, has of course been copied by Mike Myers with the Austin Powers films. So yeah, in many ways this is a hugely influential film, and very rightly so. It's a very interesting film and definitely deserves to be looked at. It's a great inspiration for comedies that follow, and even clever comedies can't resist referencing this, so ultimately it's definitely got a lot to offer. The cartoonish nature sometimes goes so overboard that a lot of the people involved apparently had a difficult time getting along with it. George C. Scott's character was apparently trying so hard to be taken seriously in spite of the silly nature of his character that he was eventually tricked by Stanley Kubrick to simply do over-the-top takes that were meant to be rehearsal takes, but in fact kept the rehearsal takes rather than the supposed real ones. And he was not very pleased as a result with Kubrick. Indeed, Scott vowed never to work for him again, though he did admit that he admired his creativity. With that said, he makes a great Yosemite Sam ripoff, and indeed, he is definitely responsible for the majority of the genuine laughs, in addition to Peter Sellers as Dr. Strangelove and as the President, which of course leads to one of the most famous lines in the whole film. Both the President and Dr. Strangelove are responsible for the film's two very famous lines, both of which are still on many Paul's lists of the most memorable film quotes of all time. Indeed, there's so much to admire about this film, it's kind of hard to point out any problems that it has. Admittedly, the slow pacing does get wearisome at times, though that is very much by design to build up the tension as well as the uncomfortableness. And with that said, some of the characters could do with a little bit more, and technically there's only one female character in the entire film, but again, I think that's entirely by design for the sake of creating this bizarre world. So, ultimately, I'd say that this film doesn't really have that much of what I'd call legitimate problems. In fact, in many ways, this is a perfect black comedy. There's so much to enjoy that even for those of you who do have serious problems with it, we're probably going to find it very difficult not to enjoy it as a whole. Ultimately, Dr. Strangelove is definitely the king of black comedies. It's very clever, very humorous, and yet, at the same time, it brings up a very uncomfortable subject matter that many of us today know all too well. And yet, somehow, it's still easy to get a good laugh out of it. The acting, the direction, the writing, the overall idea, the overall setup, they all lend itself to a very, very memorable comedy, and I'd seriously doubt that anyone would not enjoy this film. It's very, very worth your time. On the worth meter, this gets the distinction of an ultimate recommendation for me, and out of 5, this is a 5 out of 5 film. This is definitely, in my opinion, one of the best films with a comedic spin that I have ever seen, and I have seen quite a few. Thank you for your time.